Hey there, listeners! Welcome back to Life in Motion. I'm Grace Becker. I'm a licensed mental health therapist and an enthusiast of life. And today I am joined by my friend Rachel Hagen. Hi, Rachel. Thanks for joining me. How are you doing today?
Hi, Grace. Good. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Rachel is a saint. I just spent like an hour plus trying to set up all my equipment in her house. And her roommate is locked up in her room right now.
By choice. She could be out here if she wanted to.
Yeah, by choice.
Yeah.
The cat, however, not by choice.
No, he is a prisoner.
Little Archie.
Yeah.
So cute. Well, I'm really happy and really glad to have Rachel on today. Rachel and I are birthday buddies.
We are.
We are birthday buddies, just a year apart. She's a year older than me. So not only do we share a bond of our birthdays, but she and I also went to undergrad school and graduate school together.
And Ireland.
And Ireland together. We traveled together too. She's awesome. Rachel and C-Love, who was on the podcast last week, the three of us were like a trio.
Yeah, love C-Love.
In school. The three of us, we studied for our license exams together, studied for classes together.
We had a couples therapy class together, and it was literally us three and one other girl. That was the classmates.
Mm-hmm.
And our professor had us each go one by one and say what we learned from the reading, and you had to be prepared for that class.
You did. There was no slacking off in that class, because if you didn't know your stuff, it was obvious. Yeah. But Rachel's currently also working as a therapist. She's licensed in North Dakota and Minnesota, and she works at Nystrom in Fargo. How is work going? How do you like being a therapist?
It's good. I really do like being a therapist. It is definitely really interesting work. No day is ever the same as the last. I really like my coworkers. I feel like everyone just has such good perspectives. I feel like I learn just as much from my clients as maybe they learn from me. Sometimes I'm like, I have no idea what they're learning from me, hopefully good things, but I feel like I learn a lot from my work too.
Yeah.
And I leave every day just feeling really fulfilled.
I love that for you. That you know that you're doing what you're meant to do when it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
Or when it's, it's just, you leave the end of the day feeling fulfilled, I guess.
Yeah, there's obviously some sessions are hard, if someone comes in and they're suicidal or there's a crisis, that is where the work gets really hard, but also there's days where I have a session with a teen that I really connect with or really connects with me, or someone who's been coming to me for at least 6 months or more, and it doesn't feel like work, and it feels like catching up, and then at the end of the day I'm I get paid for that.
Mm-hmm.
I just got paid for people to tell me about their talking stages and me to validate their feelings and reassure them and think through pros and cons, and I do get paid for that, and it's crazy.
Yeah, and even on the days too where it's not so quote-unquote easy, when you have a client that's suicidal or they're processing something traumatic that happened to them, those days too are, even though they're more challenging, they're very fulfilling.
Yeah, it's definitely really rewarding. And when you're with a client for so long where you've seen them through those stages, I have some where they came to me maybe when they were suicidal or going through a lot of trauma, and then now they're at a point where they maybe have a job now or have graduated and are stable, and sometimes I'm just sitting with them, I'm do you remember where you were at one point? Or even if they come to hardships now, I'm think of how far you've come. I'm just so proud of them.
Yeah, that's an amazing when you see that transition. It's the best. So today, Rachel and I are going to be diving into attachment styles. I know I'm really excited about this topic today. This is something that I often consider and think about when I'm working with individuals, couples, families, really all across the board. And it's a really interesting topic. When I was talking to Rachel before we started, I was saying how it's something that I don't think that I've really heard being discussed outside of people in the profession of therapy, social work, anything related to it. So I'm really excited to dive into it today with you.
Yeah, me too. I think I have always kind of heard of it or known about it, maybe just because I was in therapy from a young age, and so maybe my therapist mentioned it. So I kind of always thought that everyone knew about it, but when you said you've had clients who you mention it to and they had no idea. I have a lot of clients who have no idea, and I'm like, I love this theory, and it just makes so much sense to me. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it.
So today, Rachel and I are going to discuss the different attachment styles, what they are, give some examples of what might indicate a certain style is at play. We will also share some interesting facts. We'll give our personal and professional opinions and some tips along the way. So, should we just slay? Should we just get right into it?
We should.
Okay, so Rachel, we'll get into the different types of them. Would you describe for the listeners what even is an attachment style?
Yes. So an attachment style is basically, I'm going to give a little bit of backstory. So it was created by John Bowlby.
A good history lesson.
Yeah, the psychologist is who created the attachment theory. And originally it says that it's a child's early relationship with their caregiver and emotional development, and then it can follow you throughout life. But it's basically how you behave and react in relationships with people. And you can have attachment styles with like your romantic partner, different friendships, like even each friendship in your life can have a different attachment style. You can have an attachment style towards your family, towards yourself, which is a whole other side of the theory that I just recently learned about.
Yeah, attachment to yourself. Honestly, when I think about it, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, like how you communicate with yourself.
Yeah.
Like if you notice like problems in yourself and like you tend to avoid, which we haven't talked about the types yet, but yeah.
We'll have to get into that maybe during the interesting facts area. That would be really cool to know more about. Yeah, Rachel's right on with it. I like especially how you pointed out it's not just with romantic relationships, which I think can be misunderstanding, but it's not. It's with apparently yourself. It's with your partners. It's with friends, family. It could be with people you work with. Honestly, you could probably even have an attachment style with your pet.
Yeah.
To be honest. Attachment styles can change with self-awareness and personal growth too. So another thing is that they can change throughout life as well. So do you want to give us what the 4 different styles are?
Yeah, so there's anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, secure attachment, and then is the 4th, I think, insecure?
Yeah, I have the secure attachment, anxious attachment, or preoccupied. They use different, I've noticed that depending where you're getting your research from, different textbooks, and even when you're talking to people, they'll have different titles for what they are. The secure attachment, I've heard that the same throughout. And then there's the anxious attachment. I've also heard it be called preoccupied attachment style. And then avoidant attachment or dismissive. And then the last one is disorganized attachment or fearful avoidant. Is that what you also found in your research?
Yeah, so, well, kind of. So this book that I have, the Attachment Theory Workbook, it talks mainly about the secure, avoidant, and anxious. And then also there's a little part where it talks about like insecure types, which is maybe the disorganized. I think they're the same, but they're just called different.
Yeah, very possible.
Yeah.
So let's get into what each of those mean, maybe some categorizing of what each of them mean. So for the first one, secure attachment, this is when there is an attachment to another person and it's identified as comfortable with intimacy or with independence. It's a trusting type of attachment where you can communicate openly about any concerns or just thoughts or perspectives. And it also can you're able to better regulate your emotions and seek support when needed. So basically, it's when you have a relationship with another person and you feel comfortable with them and they feel comfortable with you with talking about your thoughts, your feelings, what you need. You're also comfortable with seeking that intimacy, whatever that looks like for you. If it's a friend, maybe it's just chatting and getting coffee. If it's with a partner, maybe it's intercourse. And then also independence. So having that alone time is also comfortable for you too. Is that what you were also finding when you were looking into secure attachment?
Yeah, definitely the theme of you're okay if like bad things happen, but you're also okay with seeking out good things to happen to you. Like if a breakup or a conflict does arise, you aren't shying away from it, and it's not like world ending to you. Like, you are secure enough in yourself and the world that you can face it with all of your experiences head on, and that you feel pretty comfortable and confident that you have the skills to tackle it, whatever it is.
Yeah, especially the part where you and this other person you have the attachment to, you face the problems together, which is a big thing, because you'll see a theme, and with these other styles, sometimes it's people are facing things independently, which absolutely we do as individuals, but since we're talking about how your attachment to another person, a secure attachment, they tend to face struggles together.
Yeah, it's definitely less like independent, like you said. I feel like the other styles is definitely gives more vibe of like in their own world or like in their own head. They're not really letting other people in on their thought processes. Mm-hmm. So yeah, where the secure is more open with everything.
Yeah, interesting. Awesome. But yeah, secure is essentially kind of what if you're going for a goal, secure is a good goal to go for in your relationships. That's the healthy style of attachment.
Yeah, that's the one that everyone hopes to aim for and eventually get to. It's like self-fulfillment, the hierarchy of needs, but self-actualization. That's like secure.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, grad school.
Good old Maslow. Where are you now? Where are you when we need you? Can we get him on the podcast?
Yeah.
Imagine getting to interview, like,
is he alive?
No. There's no way. Or like Sigmund Freud's also long time gone.
Yeah, I don't know what. Do you think he would think anything about attachment styles?
Maslow or
Sigmund?
Yeah. I think he would on a podcast and talk about it with us. He could chat.
He'd have some interesting takes, I think.
I think so too.
Especially with child to parent.
That's why I think he would have so many perspectives.
Yeah.
He would definitely podcast hog it.
I do think a child to parent attachment is usually the most common, the secure type. Like a child usually, like if they have a normal, healthy upbringing, has a secure attachment to their parents.
Yeah. That's what I was finding a lot too, is that because your environment heavily influences it, especially how you were raised growing up and the response that your parents gave. Mm-hmm. Even when you were a baby, like when you cried, did they come to your aid? If they did, then that probably developed a secure attachment early on. If you cried and they didn't come, then that probably developed another type of attachment that we'll get into, which is just so interesting. So it kind of starts with caregivers.
Yeah.
And then it develops into other relationships.
Yeah, that's definitely the same thing that I came across when I was looking into all of these, is that even like just a repeated experience a couple times from like a parent or someone in a caregiver role, like if your needs weren't met and then that's how you learned that like you get love, is that, or with the anxious one, I found if you felt like you had to take care of your caregiver before you even had the skills to take care of yourself, then you learned like overstretching yourself is how you're supposed to get love. And so like worrying about when the next time your needs are going to be met is how you learned that that's normal.
Yeah.
And that you always have to be doing that, like worrying about people and when they're going to be there for you and like having it be unreliable.
Yeah. That's honestly a good segue into maybe anxious attachment. Do you want to give people the rundown on what that means?
Yes. So anxious attachment, well, basically it can develop, like I said, when you're asked to maintain the well-being of another, when your survival depends on them, and then you're asked to do that before you even have the resources to take care of yourself. And you're doing it out of a sense of survival anxiety, and that's how you can then develop the idea that you need that type of survival anxiety to just get love in general. But basically what it looks like in later in life, it can look like a lot of blaming, anger, guilt, nagging, and anxious attachments can kind of burn through relationship capital is a term that this lovely book gave to me.
Yeah, what's that book, by the way, that you're referencing?
It's the Attachment Theory Workbook, Powerful Tools to Promote Understanding, Increase Stability, and Build Lasting Relationships by Annie Chen. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Oh, love.
Yeah. So that's where I got a lot of the information for today from. But she talks about this idea of relationship capital, which is basically the goodwill that people build together that allows a relationship to handle challenges. So you build relationship capital through like positive experiences together, like through resiliency and hardships together, so that when you face struggles, you have this like bank of
trust.
Yeah, basically. But that with someone with an anxious attachment is there's a lot more conflict and like negative things. And so it can burn through that relationship capital really quickly, especially if it's early on in a relationship before that capital can even build up. And so it can really burn people out too. So
I'd be interested to know with that relationship capital, how that works with different relationships. So, for example, say you're in a romantic relationship with somebody and they break your trust. Basically, your relationship capital is shit. And then you get into a different relationship with a completely different person who hasn't done anything yet to build or to break your relationship capital. But if your previous relationship will affect that. I would say it would, because I definitely have had a lot of clients with that, especially if their new partner does or says something that triggers them, reminds them of their old relationship. Did the book talk about anything like that?
Not really, but I think that's definitely a good point of like maybe I think that there is such a thing as like overall capital, like personal trust in others and the world, which is even talked about in like PTSD. Like if you have a traumatic experience, whether it's like a relationship trauma or anything, that can change how you trust other people and view other people. So maybe that's where some of it stems from, which could definitely affect your attachment style. But the book did talk about there's kind of two ways that people in relationships with an anxious attachment react to someone with an anxious attachment. So when there are those behaviors of the blaming, anger, guilt, nagging, and they're doing that out of anxiety, the other partner who's in the relationship with that person will either react in a way that they like overly want to tend to their anxious partner's needs, like doing anything to make their loved one happy, or they will under-respond and they'll check out. So they'll either really try to meet their needs or completely pull back.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because in a lot of what I was finding, it was saying that they crave closeness, but also fear abandonment. So sometimes they don't know how to react. Do they react as if they're desiring the closeness, or react in a way that protects them if they're about to be abandoned? So that makes sense.
Yeah.
When I was looking for examples of each of these, they were so cute. So, anxious attachment, clingy and fearful of abandonment is the title. So, an example would be Sam consistently worries that her boyfriend Mike is losing interest in her. If he takes too long to text back, she panics, assuming the worst. She often seeks reassurance by asking, "Do you still love me?" and may become overly emotional if she senses any distance. So if you relate to that, you might have anxious attachment style.
And that's where the blaming, anger, guilt, nagging behaviors that I was talking about kind of come in. Like it sounds and looks a lot like that most of the time. What the book that I read talked about was that a lot of times people with an anxious attachment don't even realize all the time that they're doing that. Like they aren't fully aware of how their behaviors are coming across or how stressful that can be on another person. And so then when their partner like might pull away, then that can be really confusing and trigger it even more, which can push them away even more, which is why it can be such a hard cycle and burn through that relationship capital.
Yeah, I would imagine. And I'll talk about this later too, but a lot of partners tend to have opposite attachment styles. It's just an interesting fact that I found. So it kind of gives to that push and pull, especially if your partner has a different type of attachment style where they're pulling away and you're trying to chase if you have anxious attachment. Interesting. The next one is avoidant attachment or dismissive. In this one, a person with this type of attachment style values independence over intimacy. They may avoid emotional closeness and struggle with expressing their feelings or their thoughts, and they often suppress emotions and dislike having to rely on others for anything.
Yeah, kind of similar with the anxious attachment of where that can develop in childhood. It was the same thing, but if caregivers were kind of like unreliable or inconsistently there for you when you were growing up, like, or I found also like if your wins like weren't celebrated growing up, or if your only wins that were celebrated were ones that like you had to earn, like you weren't just celebrated in general, like for birthdays or like just other things you didn't have to do anything for, like if it was more like grade or sports wise, like that's the only time you got praise as a child, then you learn like I have to be good and do good things, like kind of
it's conditional almost.
Yeah. And so then they learn to manage like how needy they are, and almost like I don't have needs, I don't have any needs that need to be met. And so then if like having a need is scary for them, and so then that's where the avoid comes in, because they will avoid having needs or reaching out to other people. Like they're very independent and pride themselves on that, and like might look at other people who are voicing their needs, even if it's a secure attachment person. Like it's normal to have needs and it's okay, but an avoidant attachment person might look at that and say like, what are you doing voicing your needs? Like that's putting too much on other people. You can't put something on another person, no matter what it is.
Yeah, like I don't want to be a burden to them. I don't want to put that pressure on another person. Absolutely. And something I thought about when you were bringing up the parent, the caregiver side of this, was the 4 different parenting styles. So there's neglect, which is when a caregiver is just not there. It's abuse, neglectful. They just are not there for their children. And then there's permissive, which is they're present, but they're not really very. They don't have many rules.
Not like actively involved.
Not actively involved. They're very just laissez-faire, like whatever goes. Yeah. And then there's assertive, which is kind of that happy balance of there's rules, there's consequences, and I'm also going to meet you with compassion and understanding. And then there's authoritative, which is that really strict type of caregiving style.
Military.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So when there's either the authoritative parenting style going on, or there's permissive or even neglectful, that can absolutely create some of these, for sure.
Yeah, that's exactly what I found too with the avoidant and how that can be developed. And like we said, even if you are listening to this and thinking like, oh my gosh, I have that, or have similarities with that, like one thing that the book also talked about was like, it's not like, it is just a theory, and it's not one size fits all. You can have also combinations. You can have an anxious avoidant. You can have can you have a secure avoidant?
Oh yeah, for sure you can.
Okay.
Absolutely, especially if it's like a different topic. Maybe I'm secure in allowing my partner to touch me or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm not secure in letting them meet my family.
Yeah.
I'm anxious with that. Yeah, definitely I think you can.
So that even if you feel like there's a label that you're hearing that might fit someone you know or might fit yourself, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's 100% or that it's forever or that it's like a death sentence or anything, because it can change so much from person to person, day to day, throughout your life. Like there are things that change it, and you can work towards that secure attachment.
Yeah, absolutely you can. Like you were saying, there's no one size fits all. You could go through all 4 of them. You could go through just a few of them, and depending on the relationship, it could be with one relationship you have the anxious, and another you have secure. It really just depends. And like you were also saying, you can definitely get to secure attachment. You're not stuck with just one. An example for avoidant attachment would be, okay, hold on. I was like, wait a second, did I say the right one? Okay. So an example for avoidant attachment, the title they gave for this one was distant and emotionally unavailable. I've definitely heard clients say that about some of their situationships. So I'm just going to leave that there.
I think a lot of situationships are avoidant.
Yeah.
By definition. I've had some avoidant ones.
Yep. Don't listen, Keegan. So an example for the avoidant attachment would be Ben enjoys spending time with his boyfriend Kyle, but whenever Kyle tries to discuss their future or express deep emotions, Ben pulls away. Ben then avoids vulnerability, preferring to keep things light and casual, and when conflict arises, he shuts down instead of talking it out. I've definitely heard a lot of this with couples. Usually when I have a couple come in, one person is just going off, like, this is the issue, like, we're having communication issues, like our intimacy is down, listing all the things off. And the other person's just so quiet. So then I'll bring attention to them, like, hey, what are you here for? Like, what do you see as the issue? And they're quiet, and the other partner's like, see what I'm talking about? They don't tell me what they're thinking, they don't tell me what they're feeling. And that's definitely got some avoidant going on. Just not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to make a spectacle of themselves.
Yeah, I think the cornerstone of an avoidant communication style is the lack of addressing conflict. And it's not even necessarily conflict, it's just not addressing anything that isn't kind of along the lines of like those easygoing conversations, because anything that has an undertone of like this is going to be a serious conversation, they will probably not bring that up if they have an avoidant communication style, because in their head they're thinking, if I bring it up, that's bad for us, and so by never bringing it up, it means things are going to go well, and things are going well.
No news is good news.
Yeah, but in that too, like that can also create issues and burn up the relationship capital kind of in a similar way, because then that builds resentment. The 4 horsemen of Gottman.
Gottman. He's alive. Him and his wife alright? He's alive, right?
I think so, yeah.
Him and his wife, Julie.
Yeah.
I think that's her name. Get them on here too. Yeah, that's important, I think, to bring up for sure, is that just because you're not saying something or you're not doing something, doesn't mean it's not there. Yeah, it doesn't mean it's not there. You know, we can't keep ignoring the elephant in the room. We need to address it and bring it up and find a way to work around it. And that's exactly what a secure attachment would do.
Yes. Yeah, so the secure would have that direct communication and recognize that, yes, it might be an uncomfortable conversation in the moment, but it's going to benefit us in the long run. And the avoidant would think, if it's going to be uncomfortable in the moment, then I'm just not doing it ever, probably. But yeah, then with all of that building up, then you have a lot to address down the road.
Yeah.
And you might not be able to.
Yeah, because who's to say how long this other person you have a relationship with, whether it's a family, friend, partner, whoever, they may not want to stick around for you to figure it out. Right. Depending how bad it is and how long it's been going on for. Because I know a lot of couples where some people are just so uncomfortable with sharing their thoughts and feelings, and they are given skills, coping skills, ways to work around it, to express themselves. And some people, they don't challenge themselves in a way that'll get them to speak about it, and if they never do, then that could end relationships. Yeah, it's kind of a scary result.
Yes, yeah, it can definitely build that resentment and contempt and criticism. Another quote that I found from the book that I feel like could relate to this situation is that if the way you communicate causes stress to your partner, which is either not communicating or anxiously over communicating, and if that style of communication is working at all, it works because your partner loves you and not because you're being an effective communicator.
Let that sink in for a second. For a second, where I thought that was going was that if it causes you stress to try and communicate with your partner, then that is just another sign that something's not right. Like, that's kind of a symptom, that's a criteria that should be kind of that red flag to you of, hey, like, something's not right. If you're feeling overwhelmed coming to your chosen friend, your chosen partner with stuff, the partner who you typically would feel comfortable going to, that's a sign that maybe you're having some avoidant attachment going on.
Or also if you're bringing things up in a way that maybe is coming across more of the anxious style, like where it does start to borderline on like blaming or nagging, like constantly all the time, and you might not even realize how much it's causing stress to your partner, that you might not be effectively communicating to them in that way if it is stressing them out. And so it is partly on them to communicate if it's stressful for them, like however you're bringing things up. And then once you're aware of that, that's when you can kind of make those adjustments and maybe find a couples therapist to help you work through, like, how can we effectively communicate each other so that this isn't a stressful thing and we can get through this with as little discomfort as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was saying in the last episode to See Love too that I'm pretty sure every single episode I always recommend people go get therapists.
Yeah, I would too.
In this one, I'm recommending go see a couples therapist or go see a family therapist, depending on the relationship. Okay, should we talk about the last attachment style? The disorganized / fearful avoidant attachment?
Yeah, I think you might be more familiar with this one than I am, because I'm not sure how much my book talked about this one.
Okay, we'll see if my description lines up with what you have.
Mm-hmm.
So in this one, I found that it's when a person desires closeness but fears being hurt. So that's where the fearful avoidant is. They want to be close, but they're afraid of it, so they avoid. So a little bit of a mix of anxious and avoidant. They also can be unpredictable with conflicting behaviors in relationships, and this attachment style often results from past traumas or inconsistent caregiving. So this is kind of that two-sided of maybe your needs were met as a child from your caregiver for some things, but then not for another. It was very inconsistent, and you never knew who you were going to get that day you woke up. So that's where this comes from. And one of the examples I found online was this is where that push-pull dynamic comes in that fear of intimacy and abandonment. So for this one, Mia wants to be close to her boyfriend, Alex, but the moment that he starts getting too emotionally close, she panics and pushes him away. She craves intimacy, but also fears getting hurt, so she sends mixed signals. One day she's affectionate, and the next she's distant or even starts a fight out of nowhere. I honestly think this style could be misdiagnosed for a lot of people, because if I was getting someone coming in and saying, I'll be really affectionate, but then I'll be distant and start fights out of nowhere. One, I'm wondering, okay, is there a borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder going on? Mm-hmm. And my immediate thought would go to anxious attachment. But it's a mix of kind of both.
Yeah. I do also have a note that says when a caregiver is inconsistent or unresponsive, that's when an insecure attachment type might develop. When in a baby can manifest as, it calls it anxious resistant, avoidant, or like you said, disorganized.
Yeah, in this one, I'm trying to think of an example of how maybe trauma or your caregiver may have reacted to you in the past. And usually with like the trauma aspect, it would be a lot of that cycle of abuse, where you start out in the honeymoon stage and then you get into tension building, and then there's that big explosion, and then they're feeling remorseful, the abuser, and then back in the honeymoon, and the cycle is starting over again. And sometimes you can go through that cycle in one day. Sometimes you can go through it in a week. It just depends. And if you're a person who grew up in a home like that, where you were in that cycle and you woke up never knowing where you were going to be at, that's absolutely going to create this avoidant anxious avoidant attachment style.
Yeah, or even like growing up with a parent or a caregiver that maybe had their own mental health struggles, like even if they had like depressive episodes and maybe were inconsistent with like how much they were getting up and taking care of the house, taking care of you and your siblings, and then maybe a depressive episode would happen and then all of a sudden they're not there and you're having to take care of everyone and everything. That would get really confusing, and how do you know when or how to rely on people, and maybe learn sometimes you can, but not all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you relate to that one, go to a therapist and talk about it with the people that you're struggling to be close with, to connect with.
It's a really tough way to grow up, and you deserve to have support through that. I think that
absolutely
is the biggest part of therapy that I love, is just the support that people can get through it and just get from coming every day. Like, just having a space to let things out, and like sometimes it can be a venting space or just a spot you can share things without worrying about judgment or things coming back at you from. And even like sometimes I have clients who don't have a whole lot of people in their life in their corner, like friendships or family, and I think having a therapist can just be another great person to have in your life and go to for support.
Yeah, I love that. That's really beautiful. And if this is your sign, not that you needed it, but if you needed it, Rachel and I are giving you permission to say, yeah, it's okay to feel your feelings and to think your thoughts and to make space for them. And you absolutely should do that. And the people who are meant to be your people, who are meant to be in your life, would hopefully be understanding and support you in that, whether it's your therapist or it's family, friends, whoever. Okay, so I was thinking was there anything else with any of the attachment styles that you wanted to share before we get into some of those interesting facts?
I think I could be ready.
Okay. Yes. Do you need a water break?
Yeah.
Take a water break.
I think I shared some of my facts too.
You did. You shared some of my facts.
Really?
Yeah. Which is fine.
Get ready.
Okay, so now I thought that we could go back and forth sharing some interesting facts we found and then discuss them. Do you have a fact that you'd like to share first?
Yeah, so the one I think I first want to share is kind of more of an overall like couple fact, and it's from our boy Gottman.
Oh, Gottman.
I don't know if we've explained, but he's a...
Oh yeah, we should explain these people.
Yeah, he's a couples therapist with his wife, Julie Gottman. They wrote this book, The 10 Principles of Couples Therapy, that we read in grad school and had a class on.
They've probably written so many books, and they do tons of public speaking lectures all the time.
Yeah, they're quite the girl bosses. But, so this fact comes from him, and it was in my attachment theory book. But, did you know it takes 5 positive interactions for a couple to restore peace and balance after 1 negative interaction?
I didn't, but I use that as a strategy for couples all the time. Mm-hmm. Or even individual. I'm like, for every negative comment you tell yourself, I want you to say 5 positive things.
I'm sure it would be true with yourself too. Like, negative self-talk, having to try to counteract that probably does take more than the negative ones.
Yeah, I love that fact. That is interesting.
So that's the positive interactions. Those are the relationship capital. Yeah. So the 1 negative interaction is like 1 tally off of your relationship capital, and then you got to build it back up.
Could you give an example of what a negative and a positive interaction would be while you're trying to build that capital?
Yeah, so a positive interaction would be like your partner makes you a meal and like gives you a compliment, maybe makes you a coffee, but I think the key part is you have to feel positive when they do it. Like, if they make you a coffee, you're like, oh, this again, or like, he didn't get my order right, or something like that. Like, that isn't really, I think, what they're talking about. Something that your partner does, or a moment that you shared that you genuinely feel like you're connecting and that it's a positive moment. And then a negative interaction or moment would be like maybe a dig your partner makes at you, or even like a conflict that you both have.
And honestly, like shutting down.
Yes.
Like if you have 2 opposing styles and they like butt heads.
Yeah, I think it could look like maybe big or small, like as big as yelling at each other, saying something mean to one another, or as small as like not returning like a hug or a kiss, or just turning away from affection when your partner's trying to give it to you or you're trying to give it to them, like not answering bids for attention.
Yeah,
which is
bids.
Gottman.
Which is from Gottman. Yeah, and for people who don't know what that is, when you put out a bid to people, you can put out a direct bid or an indirect bid. So a direct bid would be, for an example, in a romantic relationship, would say, hey, I really miss you. Is it like, could we cuddle for 10 minutes? They're directly telling you what the issue is and what they need. But there's also indirect bids. So if I were to go to my partner and be like, what do you think about my hair? And I just dyed it. And I'm like, what do you think about it? And if he doesn't pick up on the hint that I'm looking for a compliment on my hair, then that could invalidate me. But if he picks up on my indirect bid and he's like, oh yeah, I love it, like, you just dyed it looks great, that's gonna increase our connection together. So that's what the bids for connection are.
So I think then those interactions could go one of two ways when you're putting out a bid for attention. If your partner returns the bid, or if you return the bid, then that can be a positive interaction, which builds your relationship capital. And if when you dye your hair, your partner says nothing when you were hoping they'd say something, then that could be one of those negative interactions. Like, you do take that negatively.
Yeah. My interesting fact is about brain chemistry and how it plays a role. People with anxious attachment tend to have higher cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, when feeling disconnected, while avoidant individuals may suppress emotional responses to stress, which I just find that really interesting, especially when you get in how your brain chemistry plays a role in this, whether it's your cortisol levels or it's your dopamine intake. It can just play such a role on your mood and then your behavior and how you react to a person putting out a bid.
Yeah, I think anytime you take it to the biological level, it just adds more validity to it, because I think a lot of times with mental health too, even though it is a pretty established field now, there still is some people who don't believe in it or feel like, just get over it, or you can figure out a way, and like, I didn't have that growing up, or things like that. But when you add like the brain chemistry part of it, it shows how real this actually is. Not that it wasn't real before, but like, you can put it down to a science and put words and data
to it, to
these theories. Yeah.
And you pointed out earlier too that these are theories, and this is just part of what makes it such an interesting theory, is when you do bring in those scientific stats and how it affects your brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what's your next interesting fact?
So I think my fact is going to be kind of about how researchers first kind of used the attachment theory with babies. So it was originally found by it was called the strange situation test. So the psychologist John Bowlby conducted this test where a baby was separated with their caregiver. I feel like we kind of reviewed this in maybe undergrad and maybe a little bit in grad school.
Yeah, that sounds familiar to me, taking the baby away from the caregiver to see how they respond.
Yes, so basically there's like a playroom, and the baby will come in with their mother usually, and then mom will get up and leave, and based on how the baby reacts to their mom leaving is how you can tell their attachment style. So if the baby doesn't really notice their mom leaving at all, that can actually be an avoidant attachment style. So that would be a bad sign. If their child doesn't notice their caregiver leaving at all and they have no reaction to it, it means that they're not expecting their parent to meet their needs. Where if they like have a full-on meltdown and they're throwing things and like do not feel safe at all, they don't believe that their parent's ever going to come back and that they're being abandoned, that would be the anxious style. And then the secure style is where like they definitely notice their parent getting up and walking away, and they show signs of sadness or being upset, but they can soothe themselves pretty quickly and be confident that their mom is going to come back eventually, and that they're not just being left, and they can be safe to play while mom is gone.
Yeah, I've seen that video, and it's very interesting. A lot of tests that they have done in the past would not be ethical today.
This is like a pretty old study from what I remember. I don't think they would conduct it today because the babies can't consent to being under.
That's a good point. There's a lot of studies that they did back when nobody realized, we do have to get consent from people to do this. That would otherwise be really unethical, and it is. I saw that video. Have you watched it?
Yeah, I think I watched it in undergrad, maybe it was like child development or some kind of psychology class.
Yeah, that's interesting. My other interesting fact that I have kind of teased with a little bit is that partners can have opposing styles, and they tend to most often have opposing styles. Anxious and avoidant individuals frequently attract each other. And this is where I was saying earlier that is creating that push-pull dynamic where one, the anxious attachment person, is seeking closeness and the avoidant person is withdrawing. And it's really interesting to me how that happens, because you would think, oh, well, if I'm a person who's anxious and needs reassurance, let me find a partner who can do that and give me that. So maybe two anxious attachment people could find each other. But it really doesn't happen that way most of the time. It's quite the opposite. This is maybe where that saying opposites attract come in.
I think also, I wonder if the anxious avoidant relationships start that way too, because from, I guess, everything that I learned with researching all of this is that oftentimes, even if it is a secure partner, but they're experiencing their first anxious attached partner in a relationship, they can even learn to become avoidant in that relationship. Like when their relationship capital is spent up and burned out, they will, even though they have always approached situations with healthy communication, if they're like bids for communication and they're not like learning how to effectively communicate with their partner, like I said, if the communication is causing stress, then it's only working because that person is trying to just love their partner and make it work, not because it's effective communication.
Yeah, that almost relates to what I was saying earlier of, can you have a general overall capital?
Yeah.
Because of how previous relationships, even if it's not the same person, but like could trigger it.
I think like the types of reactions that anxiously attached people typically get is either like that pulling away or the over tending to their needs, is where if the secure person is trying to over tend to their needs and realizing over and over and over it's not working, then they're thinking, I need to try something else, and something else would be completely pulling back.
Opposite action, which is another skill. Okay. Do you have any other interesting facts that you want to share?
Yes. So we have talked about how your attachment styles can change throughout life and just different things. So some major life events that oftentimes or commonly could maybe change your attachment style is becoming a parent, getting married, overcoming a trauma can trigger maybe like a reevaluation of attachment, or maybe experiencing a new trauma could create a different type of attachment too. And then also you can always recognize your own attachment style and work through any unhealthy behaviors that you notice towards that positive change. So even if an attachment style does get triggered through any of those life events, like we've said, it doesn't mean that you're like stuck in that necessarily.
Right. I always say to clients that people are designed to grow and to change. So if you notice that that's happening to you, that's totally okay. That is so okay for that to be happening. People are designed to grow, we're designed to change, we evolve, and as you go through those major life events of getting married, becoming a parent, job changes, moving to different states, to different countries, that is going to change how you interact with other people and yourself, which you talked about that earlier, how you can have an attachment to yourself. They do change with time. So as you grow and you learn and you're exposed to new experiences, you're most likely picking up on some new lessons and some new messages that you can absorb and use to influence what you attach to others.
I really like what you said about, like, there's always room for growth and change as people, and that's the great part about being human. I think it was either my internship supervisor or Linda, one of our professors, who said it to me, but they said the good part about being human is that we're not made out of stone, and if we're not made out of stone, that means change is possible.
Oh.
So I always remember that, even with some of my, like, kind of set in their ways clients, or people who feel like they're in ruts or just at a place in their life where things have always been the same and maybe they're not happy with it and they feel like, well, nothing can change because it's never changed. Nothing can ever never change.
Yeah.
Nothing can't ever not change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
It's not made out of stone, so that means it can change, even if it feels like it can't.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. We need to get that framed and hang up on a wall.
I want to.
I think I've given most of my interesting facts. If I didn't, they were certainly already said. For example, I'll just reiterate some of them. Attachment styles can influence more than just romantic relationships. They can influence friendships, workplace interactions, even parenting styles. They are often complex, so you can have a combination of them. These styles combine things like anxious and avoidant tendencies, often stemming from things like childhood trauma or inconsistent caregiving, making relationships especially challenging. So, yeah. Do you have any others to add?
I was thinking, there is a part in my book that talks about working towards, like, just how to approach a partner with an anxious attachment style, like different tips or ideas of how to have a conversation. I think maybe that could be helpful for this scenario.
That actually is a really great segue into kind of the next category I wanted to get into.
Okay.
Was how can people with, and whether it's anxious attachment, anxious avoidant, disorganized, whatever it is, how can we get to that secure attachment style? So that sounds like that would go well with this category of how we can get there.
Yeah, so some tips that my book gives is some suggestions to help a loved one when they're in a moment of panic or anxiety. So you could approach it with reassurance by saying, like, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. Reassure them that, like, they're not being abandoned and that you are there for support and comfort. So that's one way of approaching it. Also proximity and contact, if that is appropriate for the relationship type. Like if this is a romantic partner, you could try using like a loving touch or like holding their hand, making eye contact, smiling, arm around them, a hand on their shoulder. That could be a helpful way to kind of soothe some of their anxiety. Taking the lead, so helping them manage their anxiety with direction, telling them like it's okay, slow down, just give me a moment to think, we're going to take this, step by step, moment by moment. And then pacing expectation, so let's talk about this in a few minutes, let's just calm down, let's take some deep breaths. And then finally asking for feedback, so how do you like the way that we communicated this time? What do you think about the way that we just talked about things? Like, how do you feel afterwards? So kind of doing like a check-in. And so basically those are tips on how to work towards that open communication that a secure type approaches conflict with. So trying to be as open and having a neutral tone as possible.
I love that. The open communication is arguably one of the biggest elements in getting to that secure attachment. And shifting towards a secure attachment style, it can be challenging, and it is also absolutely possible with self-awareness. So first is recognizing what is my current attachment style and what relationship context. So reflect on what relationship it is that you're considering, how you might be attaching, and then moving into that intentional effort with the open communication. Not only expressing your needs clearly, but also challenging any negative thoughts you might have. I know for a lot of people who, whether it's anxious or avoidant, they might catastrophize, say they didn't text back, they must not love me, or if it's avoidant, maybe they'll say like, nobody cares anyways, so let me just not talk about it. Challenge those thoughts, because those are irrational negative thoughts. So if you can challenge them to be more productive for you, then you'll find that you're getting closer to a secure attachment.
Yeah, and I think really looking at what kind of thoughts are you having come up for you in your head can be a really good clue to what your attachment style is. Because if you are having a lot of those thoughts of like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? I have to reach out. If I don't reach out, something bad's going to happen. Or I just have to know what's going on at all times. Or having any thoughts of like, I feel like they're abandoning me. Or there is no way I can't live without them. If you feel like there's any type of distance and that really scares you, that could definitely be a big indicator of that anxious attachment. And then you could even go deeper in that, which often we do in therapy, of where do those thoughts come from? Did you have an experience that really triggered that for you, like in early adulthood or childhood, which is where core beliefs can be created and stem from? Do you believe about yourself that these thoughts are coming from? Like, do you believe you're worthy of love? Do you believe that this person is capable of loving you, and are you accepting it? That was another thing my book talked a lot about, is the idea of self-compassion and fully accepting yourself and accepting your attachment style.
Something that my supervisor, Christy, says is, I want to help put out this fire, but I also want to know the source of the fire.
Yes.
So going back, like you're saying, to where does this stem from, right? I want to help you, but I don't want to just put a Band-Aid over a gushing wound. I want to go sew that bad boy up. I want to figure out what caused it in the first place.
Right. I think really getting to know yourself and getting to know what are your triggers for, even if you are someone where you feel like I am pretty secure, I feel like I do mostly align with the secure attachment, but I think I do have maybe some anxious or avoidant tendencies. What are some of the things that are triggering those tendencies? And then once you know that, then you can get even deeper into that. What are some things that could help me when I am feeling triggered? How could I communicate that to my partner? How could they help me? What are some things that are soothing?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of what you're saying is the soothing. Learning to self-soothe and regulate your emotions is really important. If you feel anxious or triggered, try doing grounding exercises like deep breathing, meditating, mindfulness, journaling. I always like to say reflect, don't react. Because when we're reacting, we're kind of doing things in a split moment, versus if we just stop, take a step back, observe what's going on, and proceed by mindfully reflecting and doing things based on that is going to be more productive. Secure people don't rely solely on their partner for emotional stability. So if you find that you are doing that, then that's a sign of, okay, we also need to find some self-acceptance, like you were saying. Maybe do a little self-care, work on our self-worth, trying to understand what makes you the person that you are, the strong, sexy, beautiful, intelligent person that you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think also if you are acting in those split-second times, like you're acting before you react, or you're reacting before you're processing it, then you're acting in a fight or flight moment. And if your fight or flight reactions are usually based on your attachment style, then you're probably going to do whatever it is to feel like you're protecting yourself, and that might not be the best communication for you and your partner. Where someone with a secure attachment isn't thinking, how do I best protect myself? It's how do we healthily communicate through this problem together?
Yeah.
Not how do I not get abandoned, or how do I avoid this at all costs?
If you're an avoidant person, practice allowing closeness without withdrawing from it. You may feel uncomfortable. We'll get through it.
Lean into it.
Lean into it. If you're anxious, respect your partner's space without trying to assume the worst. Again, if you're having those irrational thoughts that they don't love me anymore, they're not responding back to me, remind yourself of the facts. Okay, they're at work, they're probably busy, they say they love me, they've never given me a reason not to trust them. So again, leaning into self-acceptance and understanding that it is totally okay if my partner wants space. And part of that is not only setting, but respecting boundaries that people set up. Because healthy relationships have a balance of intimacy and independence, like we said at the top of the episode. Any other tips or coping skills that people could use to get to that secure attachment?
I think, like you were just saying, with thinking on the facts for someone maybe with more of an anxious style, of also, even for avoidant or anything in general, accepting the help too, or accepting the soothing, accepting comfort from your partner. Like if they are really trying to communicate with you and give you an explanation, of trying to, as much as you can, accept their answer versus relying on the feeling of the anxiety or the urge to avoid, I think also can be helpful. And that's where I was talking about, like, lean into it versus away from it, which can also be a type of exposure therapy. Like, lean into the anxiety, and the longer you can realize that you can get through it and the world doesn't end, the more it's going to feel doable to do.
Yeah, take baby steps. So if you're avoidant, practice slowly expressing and giving more information up so that it's it's challenging enough, but not so challenging that you completely shut down and regress, right? And then the opposite, if you're maybe more anxious, try not to seek consistent reassurance. Try instead to build up that independence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One final tip or maybe strategy for people is that you are heavily influenced by the people you surround yourself with. So if you are surrounding yourself with people who are very anxious, attached, who are avoidant, and struggle to get out of that, then it's very likely that you would also exhibit some of those behaviors as well. But if you are surrounding yourself with people who are within that secure attachment model of a healthy relationship, they're going to have traits like trust, stability, open communication, which is, like we were saying in the episode, that's kind of the goal, that's the hope for going through these. Then you're more likely to also have those traits if you surround yourself with people who also exhibit those behaviors.
Yeah, people you can look up to and that they can also support you and that you can learn from. And it is okay if you recognize that there's some people in your life that maybe have some of these other attachment styles that might not be also at that completely secure point, but recognize how that's affecting you and is that, hindering your self-journey as well. And seeing, like, maybe I just listened to your boundaries episode, so maybe there's some boundaries you could set.
Yeah. And if you're curious what Rachel's talking about, go back a few episodes where Christy and I talk about boundaries and self-care. Well, that was great. Any final thoughts on attachment styles that you'd like to share, Rachel?
The book I've been referencing throughout this podcast, again, it's the Attachment Theory Workbook by Chen. In this book, there are some worksheets and examples, so if you are really like, I feel like I'm resonating with some of this or I just want more information, I felt like it was really helpful, and there's some like little exercises in it that you can do even with like you and your partner. There were some examples, and so I think that could also be helpful too.
Lovely.
Just a little resource.
Yeah, I was actually going to also give a book recommendation. So there are different types of relationships you can have, and as we discussed, you can have a relationship with yourself, and a couple, family, and all those things. And in romantic relationships, there is a whole new branch of different relationships you can have. And one of those is a polyamorous relationship, where it's typically 3 or more people. And there's a book called Polysecure. Fantastic book. Oh my gosh, what's her name? I don't have my phone. Oh, it's being used. I can't remember her name.
Do you want me to look?
Yeah, it's like, I swear it's like Frankie or Anne something.
Okay.
Polysecure.
Jessica Fern.
Okay, Fern. Frankie or Anne. Okay, so
Okay.
Anne Frank. No. I swear I read the book. I can do this. Polysecure, Jessica Fern wrote that book, and it's really great. It outlines, well, honestly, we probably did an outline of what she covers way more in depth, and she gets into it in a polyamorous relationship and how you have to be very secure with your primary partner in order to be able to branch out to find your secondary partners. So it's just very, very good read. So if you're interested in that, you can find that, I'm sure, all sorts of online and in-person bookstores. But a little summary of what Rachel and I covered today. We talked about what attachment styles are. We talked about the 4 main types. We gave some examples, interesting facts about attachment styles, and we also discussed on how to get to that secure attachment. So thanks so much for listening. Thanks, Rachel, for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic having you, of course. Thank you. If you have questions about what Rachel and I discussed today, or if you have any insight or stories you'd like to share, you can email me at life.motion24@gmail.com. My Instagram is life.in.motion24. I release a podcast episode every week, so stay tuned for more on all about life in motion. Until next week, embrace the chaos and find the beauty.